All right, let's dive into Denali Therapeutics. This company is trying to solve some of the toughest problems in healthcare. We're talking neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
And they're doing it with some really cutting-edge science.
Yeah, but here's the catch. They don't have any products on the market yet.
Right. So that makes them a really interesting case study for investors.
It does, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. We've got a ton of research reports and financial data, all to help us and you understand if Denali Therapeutics is a company worth taking a risk on. You can find links to all our sources in the episode description, by the way.
So think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding this company, their science, and yeah, their potential for growth.
Absolutely. So let's not waste any time and just jump right in. Chapter 1, Understanding Denali's Business. We know they want to develop treatments for neurodegenerative diseases, but what does that actually mean? I mean, what are they actually doing and who are they targeting?
Well, think about this. The global population is aging, right? Which means the number of people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases is growing rapidly. So that creates a massive need for new and effective treatments and a huge potential market for companies like Denali who are trying to develop them.
Okay, so a lot of potential demand, but I imagine that also means a lot of competition, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've got big pharma companies with tons of resources, and you've got all these new biotech startups. Everyone wants a piece of this market. Plus, developing drugs for neurodegenerative diseases is just really, really hard.
Yeah, it's not like coming up with a new allergy medication. Why is it so difficult?
Well, for one thing, these diseases are incredibly complex. We're talking about intricate biological processes that scientists still don't fully understand.
I see.
And then there's the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
It's this protective mechanism that makes it really difficult to get drugs into the brain, which is where they need to be to treat these conditions.
So they're facing some big challenges scientifically and competitively.
They are.
So that brings us to Chapter 2, Evaluating the Management Team. Can they handle all of this and lead Denali to success?
Well, the CEO is Ryan Watts. He has a pretty impressive track record in drug development. He's been involved in taking multiple drugs to clinical trials, so he knows what he's doing.
So a good amount of experience there. What about the rest of the leadership team?
Well, the entire management team is made up of experienced people from the biopharmaceutical world. And what I find encouraging is their commitment to transparency. They actually communicate with investors pretty regularly, letting them know how things are going.
Okay, so they've got the experience, the expertise, and they're transparent.
Yeah.
That's a good start. But what about their financial health? That's what we'll look at in Chapter 3.
Right now, they're pre-revenue, so they're burning through cash to fund all of their research and development, which isn't unusual for a company at their stage.
Yeah, that high cash burn rate, though, that can be a red flag for some investors, right?
It can be. But Denali has over $832 million in cash and equivalents. That should give them enough runway to keep going and fund their research without having to raise more money immediately.
So they have some breathing room, which gives them time, but they have no profits, meaning no dividends for investors in the near future. What are some other key financial metrics that investors should be paying attention to?
Well, their cash burn rate is something to keep an eye on. Investors need to know how quickly they're spending their cash and how much progress they're making towards things like clinical trial results. Another important thing is their ability to secure funding through collaborations, licensing agreements, grants, things like that. These can be big sources of funding that can extend their cash runway and avoid the need to issue more shares.
All right, so we've got a company tackling a massive problem.
With an experienced leadership team.
And a decent cash position, but no revenue yet. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute to talk about what the market thinks of Denali. All right, so we've got this company, Denali, going after a huge market, experienced leaders, decent cash, but no revenue yet. What does the market think about all of this? How are investors feeling about Denali?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. If you look at the analyst ratings, the sentiment is pretty positive overall. Most of the analysts covering Denali have given it a buy rating, some even a strong buy.
Okay, so the analysts are feeling good about it. But we all know analysts aren't always right. What are some other ways to gauge market sentiment? Are people betting against Denali?
Not really. The short interest in DNLI is pretty low. It's only about 5% right now. That tells us that there aren't many investors who are actively betting that the stock price is going to go down.
So we're seeing positive signs from both the analyst ratings and the short interest. But that's only part of the picture, right?
It is.
What about the ownership structure? Who are the big players who own Denali stock?
Well, some major institutional investors hold big chunks of DNLI. We're talking about firms like BlackRock, Bailey Gifford, and Vanguard Group. These are some seriously big investors with massive portfolios, and their involvement definitely suggests some confidence in Denali's long-term prospects.
Yeah, that's a pretty big vote of confidence. But what about the people actually running Denali? Are they putting their money where their mouth is?
That's where things get a little more complicated. Insider ownership is actually relatively low, and there has been some insider selling lately. Now, that could go for any number of reasons, maybe personal financial needs, portfolio diversification. It's not necessarily a red flag, but it is something to keep in mind and maybe do some more research on.
It definitely makes me curious. All right, let's move on to risk assessment, something every potential investor should be thinking about carefully.
And that's where a SWOT analysis comes in handy. It lets us look at Denali's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in a really systematic way.
Okay, so let's break that down. What are some of Denali's biggest strengths?
Well, their proprietary technology called transport vehicle technology, it's a big one. This technology allows them to get drugs across the blood-brain barrier, which is a huge challenge in treating neurodegenerative diseases. And then you've got their deep expertise in these specific diseases, their intellectual property portfolio, and their partnerships with some leading research institutions. These are all major strengths.
That transport vehicle technology, that sounds like a real game changer.
Yeah.
But every company has its weaknesses. What are some of Denali's?
Their biggest weakness is that they are still a clinical stage company. They don't have any approved products yet. That means they don't have any revenue from product sales. So they are entirely dependent on collaborations, licensing agreements, and external funding. All of that can be unpredictable. And their high R&D expenses are another vulnerability. Developing new drugs, especially for complex diseases like Alzheimer's, it's really expensive.
So they're reliant on outside factors and they have a high burn rate.
Right.
What about opportunities? Where can Denali go from here?
Well, the market for neurodegenerative disease treatments is growing like crazy as the global population ages. So if they can develop and get their therapies approved, there's a huge opportunity there. And they could also expand into new therapeutic areas beyond their current focus. They could use their technology and expertise to target other diseases.
So massive potential for growth and expansion. But we can't forget about the threats. What are the things that could derail Denali's plans?
Competition is fierce. Denali is competing with huge pharmaceutical companies that have a ton of resources and with smaller biotech startups that are coming up with new approaches. And the regulatory landscape is complicated and always changing. They could hit regulatory hurdles that could delay or even stop the approval of their therapies, even if they show promise in trials.
So competition, regulation, and then the inherent uncertainty of scientific research. Denali's path is not a smooth one. What would you say is the biggest threat they face?
Honestly, I think it's the possibility of clinical trial failures. If just one of their late-stage trials fails, that could seriously damage their financial stability and make investors lose confidence. Their whole business model depends on getting through those trials and getting their therapies approved.
That's a great point. Their future really hinges on those clinical trial results. It's high stakes for sure. We've covered a lot today. We've looked at Denali's business model, their management, their finances, how the market feels about them, who owns the stock, and all the potential risks and opportunities.
We've really gone through their strengths and weaknesses, and it's clear they have a lot going for them, but they're also facing some really tough challenges. It's a classic high-risk, high-reward situation. And that brings us to the big question: is Denali Therapeutics a good investment?
That's the question we'll try to answer in the final part of our deep dive, where we'll put all of this information together and see what we can conclude. All right, so we've spent this deep dive looking at Denali Therapeutics from all these different angles. Their big ambitions, their experienced leadership team, their tough financial situation, what the market thinks, and of course, all those risks. Now, the big question, is Denali a company you should buy stock in?
And this is where things get really interesting, because there isn't a simple yes or no answer. It really comes down to you, your personal investment style, and how much risk you're comfortable with. If you want a safe, stable stock that pays dividends, well, Denali is not that.
No, this is more like venture capital, but on the public stock market.
Exactly. You're betting on the possibility of huge scientific breakthroughs that could completely change how we treat diseases like Alzheimer's. But, and it's a big but, that possibility comes with a lot of uncertainty.
So let's say I'm a listener who likes taking risks. What about Denali would make it a good investment for me?
Their transport vehicle technology, that's what makes them really stand out. If it works as well in people as it has in the lab, it could revolutionize how we treat all kinds of diseases, especially Alzheimer's. I mean, imagine being able to get drugs directly into the brain past the blood-brain barrier. That's a game changer.
It's like finally finding the key to a door that's been locked forever.
Exactly. And they've got this really talented team of scientists all focused on these neurodegenerative diseases. And these aren't just any scientists, they're real experts in these specific conditions.
So you've got potentially groundbreaking technology, a team of experts, and this huge need for new treatments. That's a pretty compelling combination.
It is. And don't forget about their financials. Sure, they're spending a lot of money right now, but they also have a lot of cash on hand, which gives them time to achieve some of their big goals.
Okay, so for people who are comfortable with risk, there's a lot to like. But let's look at the other side. What are the biggest warning signs for potential investors?
Well, they don't have any products on the market yet. Their whole future is riding on successful clinical trials. If one of their late-stage trials fails, their stock price could crash.
It's a big gamble for sure.
It is. Plus, the competition is intense. They're going up against some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, companies with way more resources. Denali has to be perfect to succeed.
So even with their amazing technology and expertise, there's no guarantee they'll make it.
That's the reality of investing in biotech. High risk, high reward. You're betting on science and on the company's ability to deal with all the complex regulations.
Okay, so for our listeners who are thinking about Denali, what's the one most important piece of advice you would give them?
Do your own research. Don't just take our word for it or rely on any single source of information. Really dig into Denali's drug pipeline, their financial statements, their management team, read analyst reports, their SEC filings, all of it. You need to understand the competition and all the regulations they have to deal with. The more you know, the better you can decide if Denali is the right investment for you.
Great advice. Knowledge is definitely power when it comes to investing.
And remember, there's no such thing as a risk-free investment. Diversification is really important.
Absolutely. Before we go, we really want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Denali Therapeutics? Do you think they'll be successful, or are the risks just too high? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel for more in-depth analyses of interesting companies. We break down complex topics so you can become a smarter investor.
And a reminder that this is not financial advice. We're just a couple of people who are fascinated by investing. Always do your own research, talk to a financial advisor, and make your own decisions.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.